Hello everyone. Today we are going to explore Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. In the next session, I plan to discuss Sukumar Roy's Hojoborolo, and I'll definitely try to relate these two works. But today we are going down a tunnel with Alice to find out what lies in the Carrollian Wonderland. Now our journey begins on that golden afternoon of 4th July 1862, when the child in the 30-year-old Charles Ludwig Dodgson visited a wonderland down a rabbit hole along with a little girl named Alice Liddell. This wonderland has since been toured by the countless admirers of Alice, both young and old, for over a century, and its attraction has never been dimmed by monotony. Of course, readers are more comfortable with Alice than with Miss Liddell, and somewhat similarly, many know little about Mr. Dodgson, the real man hiding behind the pseudonym Lewis Carroll, the widely acclaimed author of Alice in Wonderland. Dodgson was 12 when he was sent to Richmond School as a boarder. He was a very shy boy, but he soon proved his excellence as a scholar, and the headmaster was especially pleased with his command over mathematics. Later, on 27th January 1846, he was registered as a student at Rugby. For this timid 14-year-old boy with his embarrassing stammer, the Rugby days were quite traumatic, despite the fact that his academic performance was brilliant, and very often he was placed first in more than one subject. After spending 5 years at Rugby, Dodgson entered Christ Church College, Oxford, as an undergraduate student on January 24, 1851. And here he was appointed as a mathematical lecturer in 1855 before being ordained a deacon on December 22nd, 1861. However, Dodgson never took priest's orders. Before moving on to that very important afternoon of July 1862, it is necessary to find out when Carroll had first met Alice. And for this we have to move back to a day in April 1856. Alice was playing in the Deanery garden with her two sisters when two men arrived. They had with them a large quantity of mysterious paraphernalia, this I am quoting from Crutch, which aroused the curiosity of three little girls. Photographic apparatus, they explained, as they set to work to photograph the cathedral. One of the young men was 24 years old, with brown curly hair and blue eyes. Alice thought that he must have swallowed a poker, for he stood so stiffly. It was her first recorded meeting with Charles Dodgson. 4-year-old Alice Liddell first met Mr. Dodgson, the amateur photographer, on a sunny day in April 1856. Photography was a passion for Dodgson in his younger days, and he retained this hobby from 1856 to 1880, when he finally gave it up. As a photographer, Dodgson had a special fascination for beautiful little girls. Helmut Gernsheim, in his essay Lewis Carroll Photographer, quotes a letter of Carroll to Harry Furness. You know, Harry Furness was the illustrator of another very interesting book titled Sylvie and Bruno. Now this letter reveals the shocking aspirations and tastes, especially when seen from the Victorian standpoint, of this ambitious photographer. What does he write in this letter? I quote, "I wish I dared dispense with all costume. Naked children are so perfectly pure and lovely, but Mrs. Grundy would be furious. It would never do." In 1881, even before turning 50, he resigned from his lectureship. Questions remain about how far Carroll was satisfied with his life as a Bachelor of Mathematics lecturer of Christ Church College. Stuart Dodgson, Collingwood, notes a peculiarity of Carroll's character, in that he disliked being invited to dinners and social gatherings and was strictly against accepting such invitations. This stiff, shy man, with his deafness in the left ear, his embarrassing stammer, and his effeminate appearance, obviously suffered from a feeling of incompleteness. Mr. Dodgson was certainly not very happy with his job as a lecturer. In January of the year 1856, he joined a boys' school in Oxford as a part-time teacher. On the 8th of February of the same year, he wrote in his diary, I quote, "The school class noisy and inattentive. The novelty of the thing is wearing off, and I find them rather unmanageable. Was a good deal tired with 6 hours of consecutive lecturing." Tony Beale, in his essay C.L. Dodgson, Mathematician, describes Dodgson as essentially a teacher. He states that Dodgson had a natural love of teaching, but did not have a natural gift of communication in the formal classroom situation. Dodgson indeed had the habit of guarding his mouth with his right hand while lecturing, and there is an extent of self-caricature drawn by him of himself in this posture. He clearly lacked confidence in himself, and his own awareness of this weakness made the lack even more painful to him. How important his pseudonym was to Dodgson was explained by the man himself in his letter to Catherine Lang, dated November 30, 1880. I quote, "I use a name not my own for writing under, for the one sole object of avoiding personal publicity, that I may be able to come and go unnoticed in all public places, and it would be a real unhappiness to me to feel myself liable to be noticed or pointed out by strangers." Dodgson was a logician by training, and hence he was a sensitive man with a reflective temperament. Such a man often finds it difficult to have blind faith in anything, including religion, and such a man in fact is bound to become a skeptic. Dodgson admitted that his faith in Christianity seemed insecure at times, and in the introduction to Pillow Problems, he writes, I quote, "There are skeptical thoughts which seem for the moment to uproot the firmest faith. There are blasphemous thoughts. that dart unbidden into the most reverent souls. There are unholy thoughts which torture with their hateful presence. The fancy that would fain be pure. It is true that Carroll had invented the tale of what he originally entitled Alice's Adventures Underground, mainly to amuse his little friends. However, months later, when Carroll was writing it down for Miss Riddle, he was no longer a casual storyteller, entertaining little girls on a hot summer afternoon. He had taken his job seriously, and later, after the initial popularity of the manuscript version, Carroll published the same tale with many revisions under a different title. The change of name was intentional, for a wonderland is obviously far more attractive to a child than the underground. Even though at this point, a definite question may come to our mind. A wonderland is supposed to exist above us, floating amidst the stars, the fairies and the clouds, and so it is interesting to speculate about what made Carroll think of a dark pit and a narrow tunnel leading Alice to a gloomy, dimly lit world that lies beneath the sunlit, breezy, open world. An interesting article originally published in the Times London in 1999 puts forward a probable cause. I quote, "The cause of her fall, says Tony Cooper of British Geological Survey, was the soluble gypsum rock that underlies Ripon in North Yorkshire, northern England. At regular intervals, the dissolving rock causes collapses that create holes large enough to swallow buildings." Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, was brought up near Ripon and visited the town many times. What we need to find out is whether the world underground is really a wonderland and whether Alice enjoyed her adventures there. The real question is as to whether Mr. Dodson realized that while writing the final version of Alice's Adventures, he unknowingly betrayed his real self in this tale, and that somewhere Alice had become his second self. The rabbit that leads Alice to the underground wonderland is very anxious of being late. This leads us to wonder how time can be such an important factor in a wonderland. As Alice falls down the hole, she looks down. To her great dismay, she sees only darkness. Even as on both sides of the well, she notices cupboards and bookshelves with pictures and maps. The only thing that attracts her is a jar labeled orange marmalade, but when she opens it, she is very disappointed to find it empty. Joy seems both elusive and elusive in this so-called wonderland. Alice follows the white rabbit and soon finds herself in a hall that is long and low. It is lit up by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. There are doors all around the hall, but they are all locked. Alice is here an unhappy child longing for escape and freedom. Now she comes across a tiny golden key upon a three-legged table. This is the key that can lead Alice into a Garden of Eden, the loveliest garden you ever saw, through a door not much larger than a rat hole. How she longed to get out of the dark hall and wander about those beds of bright flowers and these cool fountains, but she could not even get her head through the doorway. The moment Alice desires freedom and exposure into an open world, she confronts a disturbing identity crisis. In her frantic efforts to succeed in her mission, she alternately finds herself shutting up and opening out like a telescope. Martin Cohen, in his book Lewis Carroll, A Biography, provides an interesting chart that chronologically lists Carroll's diary entries containing personal evaluations, self-chastisements, fresh resolutions to mend, and appeals to God for mercy, forgiveness, and the strength to carry out his resolve to live a holier life. The 14 guilt-ridden adjurations and the entries made during the month of July of 1862 are indeed significant. On the 14th, he desires that he could get away and begin perhaps a system of better habits and holier life. On the 22nd, he writes, God help me to lead a new and better life. On the 24th, he cancels his visit to Streatley, as he says, where I was to have preached next Sunday. Till I can rule myself better, preaching is but a solemn mockery. Thou that teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? God grant this may be the last entry I may have to make, that so I may not, when I have preached to others, be myself a castaway. In this context, Cohen tries to guess the probable sources of these guilt-ridden apostrophes, as he calls them. I quote, Charles's sexual promptings are evident. Because they could not be ritually fulfilled, he repeatedly felt frustrated and saw himself as an inconsolable sinner. He became inhibited, irritable when his child friends did not respond to his advances. Lacking a marriage sanctioned by church and God, he consoled himself with visits from child friends that lasted the time that honeymoons customarily last. But the sexual force did not retreat. It was there and victimized him with nocturnal incursions. This may lead us to apply Freud's theory of repression and its relation with reaction formation to the Alice books. Alice's fall down the rabbit hole has been described as the best known symbol of the coitus by A.M.E. Goldsmith. He goes on to explain the symbolism of lock and key in Carroll's first Alice book. I quote, Here we find the common symbolism of lock and key representing coitus. The doors of normal size represent adult women. These are disregarded by the dreamer and the interest is centered on the little door which symbolizes a female child. The curtain before it represents the child's clothes. There can be no doubt, historically speaking, that emotion was completely repressed and that Lewis Carroll's relations with his child friends were of the most harmless and delightful kind, equally there can be little doubt of its subconscious existence. A similar illustration of repression and its corollary of reaction formation may be discovered in the phallic significance of Alice's immense length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of a sea of green leaves that lay far below her. The dual personalities and the divided self of Alice are clearly mentioned in the text. This curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. But it is no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people. Why, there is hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. The situation becomes even trickier when Alice finishes off the cake and finds that her feet are almost out of sight. Oh my poor feet, I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dears. I am sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can, but I must be kind to them, thought Alice. Very soon Alice starts asking weird questions to herself. Who in the world am I? Ah, that's the great puzzle. Then comes the gradual loss of memory. 4 times 5 is 12 and 4 times 6 is 13. London is the capital of Paris and Paris is the capital of Rome. She tries to decide, how doth the little busy bee? This is Isaac Watts' Against Idleness and Mischief, published in 1715 as one of the divine songs for children. But quite unwillingly she produces a parody of the original song. However, the memory loss is not total, for Alice is all the while aware that she is not saying the right words. This awareness makes the experience exciting yet painful. She continues to inhabit both the worlds, the world from where she has come and the world to which she has been accidentally transported. And she finds it very difficult to fit into the new state of affairs. Alice can hardly relax. For even her fan proves to be a great source of danger, and by dropping it in time, Alice narrowly escapes, or narrowly saves herself rather, from shrinking away altogether. The creatures of this wonderland have a marked propensity to misunderstand her. And even Alice, quite unknowingly and unintentionally, hurts the sentiments of the little mouse by praising the mouse hunting abilities of her dear cat Dina. This shows that spoken language proves to be a very ineffective means of communication in this strange land. In the Cheshire Cat episode, Carol, the logician, makes fun of himself and presents the Cheshire Cat as a caricature of his own logician self. When it has the cat try to prove that all the creatures living in this land are mad. The conversation that takes place between the cat and Alice is hilarious. But I don't want to go among mad people, Alice remarked. Oh, you can't help that, said the cat. We are all mad here. I am mad, you are mad. How do you know I am mad? Said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Alice didn't think that it proved it at all. However, she went on. And how do you know that you are mad? To begin with, said the cat, a dog's not mad. You grant that? I suppose so, said Alice. Well then, the cat went on, you see, a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now I growl when I'm pleased and I wag my tail when I'm angry, therefore I'm mad. Certainly. The Cheshire Puss is no ordinary cat, for it can vanish as suddenly it can appear and is capable of performing feats which can seem natural only in a wonderland. And this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of the tail and ending with the green, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. You could only see the smile. In the earlier part of the dream, Alice had felt herself as being separated from her feet, and here the Cheshire Cat becomes an ideal example of a fragmented self. The theme of madness is further elaborated in Alice in Wonderland in the Mad Tea Party, which Alice next attends. Here, Alice meets the March Hare, the Hatter and the Dormouse. Alice is not welcome as a guest and she almost forces her way into the party. The table was a large one, but three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, they cried when they saw Alice. The March Hare quite bluntly tells Alice that it wasn't very civil of her to sit down without being invited. There's a lot of violence in this wonderland. We hear the Duchess order her soldiers to chop off Alice's head. Fortunately, there is no one to carry out her orders. The cook constantly throws everything within her reach at the Duchess and at the baby. The fire irons came first, then followed a shower of saucepans, plates and dishes. When Alice ultimately reaches her desired destination in the wonderland, in the garden, even the garden with all its alluring beauty fails to provide her with innocent pleasure, joy, peace and liberty. A series of disturbing experiences here completes her disillusionment. A pack of cards with their autocratic, cruel and ill-tempered queen prevent Alice from enjoying the bliss of this heavenly place. So these cards, they cause a lot of trouble to Alice, as we'll come to know soon. Gardeners here paint white roses red, thereby tampering with their natural beauty. As the Queen's procession advances, the onlookers have to throw themselves flat upon their faces. The white rabbit has also lost its dignity. It is seen as a sycophant, talking in a hurried, nervous manner and smiling at everything. Anyone who offends the Queen even unknowingly is sure to receive a death sentence. Every now and then the Queen is heard shouting, "Off with their heads!" And even the Duchess, as Alice learns from the rabbit, is facing execution. Alice is really puzzled. And this is all she can say after hearing so many death sentences. They are dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive. What also becomes evident is that there is neither freedom nor recreation in this playground, but rather only total chaos and mismanagement. Alice describes the games played here in terms of anarchy. They all quarrel so dreadfully, one can't hear oneself speak, and they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least if there are, nobody attends to them. The Queen too is busy exercising her right. she shouts, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," and these shouts are frequently heard. Alice is soon shown to be looking for some way of escape, as wondering whether she could get away without being seen. The picture is, however, not as grim as it seems to be. Carroll puts in a special effort to remind his readers that Alice is in a wonderland, and so there is no need to be terrified. Thus Alice assures herself that they are only a pack of cards and that she needn't be afraid of them. I'll stop here today. But as I told you, this is only the first part of my lecture. In the next session, we will carry on with Sukumar Roy's Hojoborolo and how we can relate that work with Carroll's Wonderland. Thank you.